Welcome everybody. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. We see some people trying to get into the webinar right now, so please be patient and we'll get started in just a couple minutes. It'll be just a couple more minutes, everybody. We are seeing people getting logged into the webinar here. If you have any difficulties or have any questions, please use the chat box and let us know if you're having problems. Okay, everybody, just another minute. We still have people logging in here, so please be patient. We'll get started in just another minute or two. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Chris Vonamy. I am the Deputy Director for the DuPage County Stormwater Management Department, and we are here for a facility pollution prevention webinar for MS4 communities. That's Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System Communities. This is a free webinar where we will focus on common pollution prevention practices. We have several of these workshops throughout the year. The Illinois Environmental Protection Agency requires this training under the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program. We are encouraging government staff, including stormwater, public works, and transportation staff, as well as contractors and others who perform or oversee maintenance of public surfaces, to attend or view this webinar. And there will be 1.5 PDHs available, professional development hours. If you are aware of other staff in your departments that could not attend this afternoon, this webinar is being recorded and the presentations will be made available for viewing at their convenience. Mary Mitros from our office will make that email, we'll send that email out with a link to the recorded webinar presentations and that certificate for the PDHs. Typically, we have these workshops in person, but due to COVID-19, we're using Zoom meetings as our platform to host this webinar. Hopefully, we don't have any technical difficulties, but if we do, please bear with us and we'll get that rectified as soon as possible. I just want to throw out a couple thank yous before we begin. So thank you, Mary Mitros. She is our Stormwater Communications Supervisor. She is behind the scenes and running the show today, and she organized this webinar. I'd also like to thank Baxter and Woodman for helping line up our speakers for this afternoon. And once again, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. These are unprecedented times for all of us. There's uncertainty and disruption of our lives due to the global COVID-19 pandemic. We hope that everyone continues to practice good hygiene by washing their hands frequently, social distancing, wearing a mask in public, and if you do feel sick or ill, please isolate or quarantine so that we can prevent the further spread of this coronavirus. Anyway, we have 4 great speakers with us this afternoon to cover these various topics regarding facility pollution prevention. We have Dan Bounds and Jack Warshman from Baxter and Woodman, Scott Weber from the Village of Hanover Park, and Guy Lamb from the Village of Wilmette. But before I turn things over to them, I want to tell you about our chat feature. If you do have questions or comments during the presentations, please type them directly into the chat box, and we will relay those comments and questions on to the speakers after their presentations, and we'll get to as many of those questions and comments as time will allow. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our first 2 presenters, and they are Dan Bounds and Jack Warsham from Baxter and Woodman. Dan is a senior water resources engineer and the infrastructure department manager. He has over 25 years experience assisting public agencies with stormwater program development. His civil engineering degree is from the University of Illinois, and he has performed stormwater permit compliance evaluations at over 300 municipal facilities. Jack has been with Baxter and Woodman for almost a year. He received his bachelor's and master's degrees from Case Western Reserve University. He has been performing municipal stormwater program development and facility evaluations. These gentlemen will be talking about stormwater pollution prevention, BMPs, best management practices at fixed facilities. So gentlemen, if you're ready, please take it away.
These meetings like once a week, I think, or one, yeah. And it's just like Matt, Sam, Todd, and then Chad, Jeff, Cindy, and maybe Sassy, but I don't know.
I think I hear someone's audio coming through that's not mine.
Kind of doubtful.
Hi, can you hear my audio? Okay, great. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Let's together think about your facilities, operations, things you do every day from a stormwater quality perspective. Trying to switch the slide here. I'm going to stop the sharing and try a different method here. All right, so yeah, let's think from that stormwater quality perspective at your facilities, your operations. And the topics we're going to address today are material storage and handling, the materials you use and how you store and transfer those at your facilities, your parking areas, your drive accesses for your facility, your landscape areas and landscape maintenance activities that are performed, your loading, unloading, transfer areas, equipment maintenance areas, and your fueling areas and the fueling procedures that you have. And we'll talk a little bit about spills and discharges that can occur at your facilities. So you handle many materials and you use a lot of chemicals and products at your facilities to do your jobs day in, day out in different areas. And those can become a pollutant if they are mishandled and and allowed to enter a storm drain system through a rainwater rush-off or a direct discharge. So you've got materials that can produce a sediment, your dirt piles, your sands. Those can generate a sediment that can get washed off, and there's general trash and debris. Your building materials and wastes from the operations that you do. When you're working in landscaped areas, you're using fertilizers, pesticides, and those can create problems if they are misused and allowed to run off in large quantities. Your landscape materials as well, the grass clippings, leaves, trimmings, those have to be managed properly. You do several maintenance items with your vehicles and equipment, including washing. So that generates wash water. There's detergents, cleaning solutions that you might be using for degreasing and washing, and those can create an issue if they run off. You may have some salt storage at your facility, or you may be using salt in the wintertime for de-icing or other de-icers. Mentioned fuel on the last slide in your fueling areas. Those can become pollutants if they're allowed to discharge off-site. And along with the vehicle maintenance, you've got oils, hydraulic fluids, and other type of fluids that could be mishandled or allowed to discharge. And then sometimes we're dealing with paints, coatings, other decors, and we got to think about proper control of those items too. So the photos I've got across the bottom of the slide are downstream of facilities where a storm drain might enter a local creek or a lake area that's downstream of your facility, the way the stormwater flows, and trash and debris getting out of those storm drains and into those local waters. Excessive nutrients, creating excessive algal growth or other nuisance plant growth. The second photo shows paint being washed into an inlet just for lack of knowledge that doesn't go to treatment or something and coming out of the storm drain. The third photo is sediment leaving a facility for improper best management practices for erosion and sediment control, and it's really clouding up the receiving stream, as you can see there. And then the last photo is that oily sheen we can see from a fuel or an oil or a petroleum that is allowed to be spilled onto pavement and discharging out through a storm drain. So getting into specific facility areas and types of materials, I'll hand things over to Jack.
All right, so a lot of the bulk materials that we see stored outdoors that could cause stormwater pollution issues are things like salt, sand, gravel, coal patch, fuels, garbage and recyclables, or any miscellaneous items that you might have in surplus storage or your boneyard. The main best practices here are making sure that everything has a designated storage area and making sure that there's as little runoff and track out as possible. So if you look at this photo here in the bottom left, we've got an example of both. There's significant runoff from this coal patch. You can see there's that little trail going right to the storm sewer. And there's also significant track out from the salt that's being stored there. So the photo in the middle on the right is an example of better containment because this has got walls on either side. There is still the potential for this material to de-water into a storm sewer. As you can see, there's a lot of liquid on there on the ground, but this is significantly better. The dumpster at the bottom right is being covered by a tarp. So this is an example of some good material storage, making sure that there's no runoff that's going straight to a storm sewer. As far as the boneyard goes, regular inspection and inventory is the key, making sure that you're checking up on the status of everything that's back there. Checking for leaks and dealing with those leaks or spills as needed, making sure there's no runoff from something that's corroded, there's no buildup from trash or debris. In the photo in the middle on the bottom, you can see once again, we've got those telltale signs of staining here in the boneyard. Up in the top right, this is kind of what we would consider the gold standard for material storage. It's got significant containment, everything's got its own little compartment, and it's got what is assuredly an extremely expensive canopy at the top. So this might not be something that's financially feasible for everybody, but this is an example of really good material storage. Moving on to the topic of salt and de-icers, local environmental rules require permanent and closed structures for both solid salt and liquid de-icers. So whether that's a really big structure, like the one you see up there in the top right, or something that's really small, just a little container to the bottom and to the left of that. And then liquid de-icers there in the bottom left-hand corner. Once again, the key here is to ensure minimal runoff and minimal track out. These rules do allow for temporary stockpile tarping. So if you see there in the bottom right, this is allowed on a temporary basis. Again, that's just to make sure that everything's covered and you don't have significant material being washed into a storm sewer during a rain event. So I think our next speaker is going to touch on that a little bit more. So to avoid stealing his thunder, I'll move on. Not surprisingly, there is a whole smorgasbord of materials that can be on a parking lot, anything from oil to hydraulic fluids to litter that someone's tossed out of their car, landscape waste, you name it, it's going to be there. And if the parking lot isn't maintained, it's going to wash into a storm sewer during a rain event. So the key here is to use dry cleaning methods, whether that's manually or with a vehicle sweeping. If you do need to wash a parking lot with liquid, oftentimes it's a good practice to block those storm sewers so you can trap the water and dispose of it in another way, just making sure that you unclog those storm sewers once you're done. As far as runoff drains go, you've got an example of a good and a bad here on the left and the right, respectively. Runoff drains should always go to landscaped areas as much as possible. If a runoff drain goes straight down to pavement, that water is going to go straight into a storm sewer and it's going to cause pollution issues. The more water that you can direct into a landscaped area or a vegetated swale, the better. Those swales in particular, like what you see here on the bottom, those cause significantly less runoff and they do a really good job of removing those pollutants prior to anything passing into a natural water body. On a similar topic, landscape waste is something that's frequently overlooked. So these are things like grass clippings, leaves, and sticks, things that get turned up during landscape activities. So if you see here in the middle photo, you've got a whole bunch of grass sitting there on the curb line. This is not only a pollution issue for when the rain event comes and that gets washed into natural water bodies, but it's going to be a maintenance hassle as well, because all that material is going to get caught in a catch basin. So the key here is making sure that all of that material is disposed of either as trash or as compost, making sure that it's not just left out there to cause pollution issues. Same goes for soil. That's why mulch is so important, using mulch on exposed soil. As best you can, using non-toxic chemicals for landscaping purposes. And if you do have to use chemicals, making sure that you're not using it right before a rain event. Because if a rain event comes along and those chemicals haven't fully absorbed yet, not only is it a waste because that's all going to get washed away, but now it's all being directed to a natural water body. And here in the bottom photo, you can see an example of using native vegetation, native prairie vegetation, as opposed to turf grass. This is advantageous, one, again, because it does a good job of pollutant removal, and then two, because it causes significantly less runoff than turf grass does. For the loading and unloading areas in your facilities, the ideal loading and unloading area is going to be far away from a storm drain. It's going to be effectively bermed, and it's going to be connected to a sump so that any liquid that gets on the ground is going to go straight to a sump. That's not always necessarily the case at every single facility. So knowing where these storm drains go is really important, and making sure that if you are near a storm drain, you're protecting it as much as possible. So some ways to do that are doing all loading and unloading under dry weather conditions, or if possible, underneath a canopy. And again, that's just to make sure that there's as little liquid involved as possible, and you have as little chance of something passing into a storm drain as possible. If there's a liquid transfer, using a drip pan is a really good practice, just to make sure that in the event of a spill, it's going to get caught by that and not going straight into a sewer, not dewatering there, as you can see in these two photos. And then if there's loading and unloading going on inside, providing a seal or a door skirt so that if a spill were to occur, it's going to stay contained and it's not going to be going out onto pavement and into a storm drain.
All right, thanks, Jack. So thinking about equipment maintenance, vehicle maintenance that we have to do to make sure our equipment is properly running for the jobs that we need to do. Sometimes that has to be done outside, and probably the majority of equipment maintenance is performed inside a garage or inside undercover, but there are certain times that there may be so much debris on a vehicle that it needs to be cleaned off before taking it indoors, or there might be booms, ladders, things that can't be raised indoors that need to be tamed. So sometimes equipment maintenance does have to happen outside. Things like painting, grinding, coating, sanding can be performed outside sometimes, but again, a key there is to perform that activity during dry weather so that any of that material is not being directly draining off with surface runoff and can be cleaned up, swept up and disposed of properly. If we're doing outside maintenance that involves changing oil or hydraulic fluid, something like that, using drip pans or some sort of containment to prevent any spills, leaks from getting onto the drive surface. I've even seen crews use tarps down over their equipment area so that when they're done with their maintenance activity, they can sweep up or collect those tarps and keep that material contained. Again, like we've mentioned before, non-toxic chemicals or less impact to the environment would be the type of products that we want to use if we're working outdoors. And using those dry cleanup methods, shoveling up that debris from the maintenance, not letting it run off, sweeping it up if it's a small amount, and disposing of that properly, and not letting it come into contact with stormwater. And then back to the fuels. You know, it's a safety hazard, and we're dealing with flammable liquids, but they're also a water pollution threat too if the fuels are allowed to run off with stormwater. Some of the largest fish kills I've seen in our area have been caused by fuel spills, accidents, or fuel releases. So you may have above ground storage tanks at your facility, you may have below ground storage tanks, or you might just be using small cans to fill pieces of equipment in different parts of the facility. We have to first think about proper training, make sure that staff know where fuels are supposed to be stored, proper storage containers, and what areas are safe to be fueling or handling or transferring fuels within. Part of the inspection protocols for your facility should include these fueling areas and the hoses and the nozzles, checking for drips, leaks, make sure that everything is in good working order and we're not losing fuel periodically onto the pavement. And then I can't say enough about having a spill kit on hand. The photo at the bottom near the underground storage tank fueling island, that's a homemade facility spill kit where they've got their dry cleanup materials, their absorbent booms, and socks and materials to absorb a fuel spill if it happens there. And I always preach when I'm talking about spill kits to refill the spill kit after it's used. Part of the equipment inventory and checking to make sure you have what you need to respond to a spill should be checking that spill kit to make sure that it is ready. If someone's properly implemented their training, used that spill kit material, and disposed of it properly, that's great. But if they didn't take that last step of refilling that spill kit, it's not there for the next time a spill happens, and you hate to be the person that opens that up and find it empty in the event of a spill. So spills do happen. You know, they're pretty frequent, and you know, accidents do happen in life. The important thing is, you know, being prepared for them. Create a spill response and control plan, and make sure staff are trained on where are spill-prone areas and material that could be spilled, and how to properly respond to that, where the material is for cleaning that up, and who they should report spills to in the event that they happen. So again, maintaining that supply of all cleanup materials, storing the containers and materials away from storm drains, and having those spill kits or materials nearby when that spill does happen. Checking containers often for leaks as part of those routine inspection items at the facility. Drip pans, again, can be used for the transfer and maintenance of fluids, so that if a spill or drip does happen during that event, it is contained by that spill pan. And then Jack mentioned blocking nearby storm drains at times when you may be transferring large amounts of material, just to make sure if a spill does happen, it does not enter that storm drain. It can be properly cleaned up. So if a spill occurs, take a look at where that spill is happening and what might be downstream, or where that spill might be heading to. Assess those downstream areas. Contain a block of storm drain if you've got time and the equipment to do that, to prevent that from getting in to the storm drain system. For liquids, we're typically using rags or other absorbents to soak up that small spill and properly dispose of those rags, depending on what the material is you're soaking up. For solids, we're using a shovel and clean those up, or a broom to sweep up that material and properly dispose of it in the trash or back onto the pile, the stockpile from where that material came from. In the event of a large spill or a discharge that has spilled and entered a storm drain and left the site. That's something you're going to want to notify your supervisor of right away for proper notification, proper reporting, and emergency protocols. So non-stormwater discharges are any type of water usage at the facility that would generate wastewater that we would not want to get into the storm drain system. This could include vehicle and equipment wash water. This could include landscape irrigation water. If you've got a broken nozzle or things might not be set right within an irrigation system that's creating a discharge and picking up pollutants, bringing that into the storm drain system. I've even seen large air conditioning units have a flow from condensate lines and create a non-stormwater discharge from the facility. So key here is knowing what's permitted to get into the storm drain system. What is a wastewater or a wash water that need to go into the sanitary system. The top photo shows a facility that was creating a non-stormwater discharge during a really dry, sunny period of the summer, and that discharge was leaving the facility and washing pollutants off with it. Bottom photo also shows a wastewater being generated for equipment and vehicle washing, but they're on a wash pad that's properly connected to a sanitary line, and that wash water is being cared for properly. So sometimes you'll see drain inlets at your facilities or out in the street labeled as no dumping or drains to creek, drains to river, and that's a good thing to do for the inlets around your facility to let people know that they are storm drains. They are draining to a local waterway and not draining to a sanitary line or to a wastewater treatment plant. So preventing direct connection of these types of non-stormwater flows is the key. If you've got a small condensate from an air conditioning unit, like in the top photo, that can probably drain into a vegetated area and be just fine. But other larger flows of non-stormwater, we do not want to have that entering the storm drain system. So this is something, again, as part of your routine inspection and looking at your facility from time to time. Look for problems with your non-stormwater discharges. Are they creating flow off-site? Look at the outfalls or where your stormwater is eventually leading to a natural water body, and see, are you losing material? Or is there any evidence of staining or other types of problems that materials or runoff from your facility might be creating? And in other areas of the country, a stormwater pollution prevention plan or a stormwater control plan is required for municipal facilities. And these documents contain what materials you use and what products, where they're stored and located throughout the facility. Where are your drain inlets and where are different areas of the facility drain to? What are your best management practices for controlling those type of materials and activities in those areas? Who are the responsible parties that work at your facility for implementing those? And inspection frequencies and reporting procedures and documentation and things like that. The top photo is one I've worked on in another state, which is a maintenance control plan or a stormwater pollution prevention plan for a municipal public works facility. And the outline, the middle photo shows the typical outline for one of these plans. It can be a good idea to put one of these together, even though they're not required in this area, and organize it like this example, where you've got your pollution prevention team organized. What are your pollutant areas? What are the best management practices that you implement? And it makes a good training tool and a good documentation tool for proper stormwater quality management at your facility. These concepts aren't new. EPA was putting guidance out for facility-specific pollution prevention plans back over 20 years ago, like in the lower right photo. So with all of that, and in summary, I've hoped I've gotten you to think about your facility from a stormwater quality perspective, and a local surface water quality perspective, and about the materials that you're using and storing at your facility. Thinking about ways to store those materials away from storm drains and how to protect those storm drains from discharges or material loss when handling equipment and handling materials. And the idea of periodically inspecting and taking a look with your stormwater glasses on in a different way when you're walking around your facility, to think about your storage areas, proper containment for materials and liquids, looking for leaks or signs of indication that leaks might be forming, and where your drain inlets are and how to protect those. Make sure staff have the proper cleanup material for supplies and spills when they might happen. And using those dry cleanup methods, avoid washing down a spill, avoid washing down material that might be on the pavement and direct discharging that to a stormwater body. So the upper photo shows an area that was called as non-compliant in a public works facility in Illinois. And it's just because the dumpster lids were open. You know, the material or the area was well swept. Good housekeeping practices were being performed, but the fact that the lids were open created a violation, because stormwater could get into that material and drain through the dumpster, or material could blow out of that dumpster and create a pollutant or a trash and debris discharge area. So we want to be like the guy on the bottom there. He has been trained and he's using that training. He's got his cleanup equipment in hand. He's got his broom. He's using a dry cleanup method. He's sweeping that material that's on that surface rather than just washing it down into the storm drain inlet. And he's protecting that storm drain. So that's the main message that we're trying to send to you all today. And with that, Jack or I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Dan and Jack. Great job on the presentation. Very nice. I do see one question here. It says, is a tarp an acceptable permanent cover for a dumpster, or should it be for temporary use only?
So great question on tarping for dumpsters. I've seen environmental compliance audits mention this several times, and it can really be a pain to have a tarp on a dumpster if it's being used frequently, where you're taking the tarp on, taking the tarp off. But it's something that has been specifically mentioned in compliance evaluations at facilities. And what I usually recommend to people is, if you've got a dumpster or a large roll-off box for a lot of construction debris, something like that, that it be tarped when it's not being used. So if construction activities are happening around that roll-off box or that large dumpster, it can be untarped for the loading of the material. But if the shift is done for the day or the work is ceased for the day, the tarp should be put back on that dumpster or that roll-off box. So it's definitely not a permanent cover, but while the dumpster is there, we've seen audit findings that say it should be tarped when not in use.
Okay, great, thanks. One other one here is what is IEPA's definition of temporary regarding tarping salt piles? Oh,
that's a great question. And I don't ever want to say I'm representing Illinois EPA, but typically what we'll see is that the salt shipment for the year, or the purchase quantity, is able to be stored within the municipality's storage facilities. So that's just fine. But if that quantity exceeds the amount that can be stored within the salt dome or salt structure, temporary tarping of that material is allowed. And temporary could be quite a while. It could be several winter storm events or de-icing events that it takes to chip away at that excess storage pile and put in place. But it would be best to store that pile on an impervious surface, so it's not leaching into the ground, and tarped to prevent rainwater and the elements from getting at that salt. But I don't think temporary has ever been defined to specifically answer that question. It's just as long as it would take you to use that salt or get it into other storage, making sure that you've got your best management practices, your tarping in place while you've got that excess pile.
All right, great, thank you. Thank you both, Dan and Jack, great job. If our audience does have any more questions for them, please put them in the chat box and we will maybe get them to them at the end of the other presentations. But right now, We are going to move on to our next speaker, and that is Scott Weber from the Village of Hanover Park. Scott is the Streets and Forestry Division Supervisor. He's been with the village for over 30 years, and he will tell us about proper salt and material storage and handling best management practices. So take it away, Scott.
Can you see my slides? So are they wrong again?
Looks
I can
good.
see them.
All right, great. Good afternoon. I'm Scott Weber with the Village of Hanover Park. Like Chris said, I've been with the village for starting in my 30th year. I run the snow and ice here for the village. And I want to talk about proper material storage and handling of winter de-icing products. So mishandling of salt at our facilities not only contributes to poor water quality and water impairment, we waste material and we waste a lot of money. I noticed that the salt prices are down a little bit for 2021 from $86 to $81 a ton. But poor handling of materials, we can waste hundreds and actually thousands of dollars. So as it was stated before, that the permit requires that salt be stored in a permanent structure. This is an old dome that the Village of Hanover Park had 6 or 7 years ago. It was a 3,000-ton dome. It is on a asphalt surface with asphalt surrounding. This particular unit had no storm basins around it at all. You can see by the photograph that the pad was extremely flat. It held water, so we had minimal runoff. The old one did not have a door, but you'll see our newer one here in a bit that does. So dry salt storage tips, of course, indoor is always the best. It's been said multiple times about impervious surfaces. Doors should be away from prevailing winds for a multitude of reasons. You get blowing snow in there and you get extra melting and stuff. All your areas should be swept up and cleaned after an event, and make sure that your storage is away from lakes, rivers, and storm drains. You can see on the right-hand side of the photograph there, that looks like a spill somebody had from shifting their load. Either the tailgate wasn't properly adjusted or the wings were not proper. It looks like somebody went to shift their load for spreading and then didn't go back and clean it up. Back in the 90s, you would have something like that. And our cleanup process was to put your blade to the curb and push all that excess material to the curb. Can't do that anymore. Here's some examples of different salt storage domes from large to or small to large, and including a couple of tarp issues. Any of these are really, really good, but there are better. Here's a picture of our newer dome. This is a 3,500-ton dome with doors. You can see on the left-hand side of the photo, we do have a conveyor for loading material into the dome. That eliminates a lot of tracking when the semi-trucks come in to dump. I don't have a good photograph of the pit. It'd be on the left-hand side of that corner where up in the roof, you can see the tube going in. We try to load all of our salt in the spring after the winter is completed. I will put whatever our expected use for the following year into the dome. During dry months, we try to do it in a 1-week period so we can minimize the amount of cleanup. If you stretch it out for a long time, you're cleaning constantly. Again, we try to do it when it was dry, just to minimize any runoff or any problems. Here's another picture of a dome in the city of Elmhurst. I believe this is a 6,000-ton dome. It's probably one of the larger ones I've seen. Different styles, the barn style, where trucks will back completely inside. they would have the ability to fully raise their bed and dump their whole 20 to 22 ton load inside the dome. Small scale, I've seen everything from a small yard waste tote to the garbage can on the right. The material stored in a small poly shed. And again, here's another photo of them undercover. We do our own mixing of liquids here at the Village of Hanover Park. I have 4 6,000-gallon tanks on site. We have one with a organic product, a geomelt product. And then I have 2 that I mix salt brine in and store. The photo on the right, you can see those, and it says brine only. And then the tank that says GeoBlend on it in the right-hand photo is the that's the tank where all of my mixed products get distributed from. We load all of our dump trucks. They all have between 1 and 200-gallon tanks on them, to our anti-icing truck with a 500-gallon tank, to a small sidewalk spreader truck. Everything comes out of one tank, so we don't have any problems with mismixing of equipment materials, and we can monitor the distribution point. This portion of it is inside the garage. The photograph on the left is the actual mixing station where the products come in from the outside. They get blended and then sent back outside to the other tank. And then the photograph on the right where that large open area is where the brine maker goes. We have an older brine unit that'll mix about 6,000 gallons a day, maybe 12,000 gallons a day. Management and recording. It's really important to know how much material you have in your dome at the beginning of the season. It's more important to know how much has gone into the truck, how much is going onto the pavement, how much is being spread per lane mile. And as a rule, the Salt Institute back in the 90s came up with a rule of thumb that when you're purchasing your salt, if you have the storage capability, it would be best to have 150% of the average use under roof at the beginning of the season to eliminate more loading, more trucks on your process, and you shouldn't have to run out. There's a picture of my dome today. It's got about 3,000 tons of salt in it. On an average, the Village of Hanover Park uses about 1,200 tons a year. This is one of our new tracking devices. This is an AVL system that I have on 4 of my 9 trucks. This is a report I ran the other day, and it shows exactly how much salt came out of the back of each one of the trucks, how many miles spreading was actually done, the salt rate, and it also counts the amount of liquid that comes out of the back of the truck. It's really a cool system. With that, we generate our summaries for the season. We do our tracking now a little bit different. We go by fiscal year, so part of the season is in last year and part of it's in this year. So for every event in 2020, I know the cost of equipment, labor, how much salt was used, how many miles were driven. And I can tell you that we used about 760 tons this past year with 31 inches of snow at O'Hare. We have 100 center lane miles of road. Keeping the loading area clean. Make sure your operators are properly trained in loading operations. You get a new operator in there and he goes to load a truck and spills 2 tons on the pavement. That's all got to be cleaned up. One of the most important things is your drivers got to use caution when they're shifting their load in the loading area and on the roadway. All of our trucks are set up with steel spill plates, wings on the tailgates. So when you are loading and you raise your box up, it tries to maintain the majority of the salt in the truck. If a driver is careless when he raises it, he'll leave 2 trails or 2 piles on the roadway that has spilled out. Any and all spills should be cleaned up at the end of an operational period. Loaders, skid steers, brooms, shovels are the best methods, dry methods, as was spoke before. And the supervisor should be responsible for monitoring the area that we don't have any spills or any problems. Monitoring the area for our liquids, what we do in the fall, usually around September, we will start to hook everything back up. We will have an empty tank with clear water from a fire hydrant, and we will do our testing of our system to make sure we don't have any leaks in fittings, valves, or hose. We've probably got 300-400 foot of hose on the ground out there. So we've got to make sure that everything is in good condition. After a storm, all equipment needs to be dumped off and cleaned up. Any material that's spilled needs to be swept up, and wash water should not drain into the storm system. You can see the center trough here. This is the water gets from the wash gets collected there. And then the photo on the right is a triple basin system. So the water goes through there, the sediments are settled out, and then the water goes to the treatment plant. It's important in your snow manual to have everything spelled out for your material storage and handling, what to do in case there is a spill, how much material, or the way the material should be removed from the pavement, spills in the street. Everything should be spelled out in your snow plan. Plans need to be reviewed by all of your operators in the fall so that everybody's on the same page and we don't end up with any major problems. Well, that was pretty quick, but that's what I've got. Any questions? I'd be happy to answer if possible.
Okay, great. Thanks, Scott. We do have a question right here. It says, do you have a plan in place for a potential spill from the brine containers?
What we do is we have diking material in the back right by our inside, right by our material, by our storage. We would then set those out in case there was a spill. And then we would clean the material up with probably a Vactor and then get it to the treatment plant. Or if we can get it back onto the salt pile inside the dome, that would be even easier and better.
Okay, great. I am, let's see, I'm not seeing any more questions at the moment, Scott, but I think Scott will be with us for the rest of the program. So if you do have anything for Scott, please type it into the chat box and we will relay that to Scott following our next presentation. And our final speaker here is going to be Guy Lamb from the village of Wilmette. Guy has been with the village of Wilmette for 18 years. He started off as the village forester and street superintendent. And for the last 7 years, he is the deputy public works director. And he's going to tell us about a case study, facility retrofits for material management. So let's turn things over to Guy.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just waiting for the PowerPoint to upload. Okay. All right, so just to preface, we're a happy group here at the Village of Wilmette Public Works. We do like to, as much as we like to think that we're perfect, we're hardly. We do like to interact with our counterparts in other communities. So, you know, after this presentation, if I know we're in the kind of the COVID state, but if somebody wants to reach out to us with more questions, we'll be happy to work those out with you, or possibly an on-site visit, you know, stuff like that. Matt, our water sewer superintendent, Tony, our street superintendent, and Kurt, our vehicle maintenance superintendent. We're a good bunch, so we definitely like to speak with our counterparts. In developing this presentation, the focus was on specifically with like street sweeping debris and what Wilmette has at its public works facility for processing that debris and storing it. But in developing this presentation, I thought it would be good to tell a story, basically starting off with some background on the equipment that we have, what service levels that we uphold, the volume of debris that we generate on average each year. And then that'll kind of later on in the presentation when you see our facility, it'll kind of help put things in perspective on, what we process and stuff like that. Is the facility adequate, that type of thing. And then from there, we'll go into a little bit of history, brief history with our yard and kind of our humble beginnings when it comes to street sweeping and, spoils from water, sewer, that type of thing. And actually, we've had two major improvements at the yard, one in 2009, and then most recently, 2017, 2018. And we'll show how those have contributed to where we stand today. And then lastly, we'll look at what we have today in close up and kind of discuss quickly, what's working, what works, what doesn't, what would help people out if they're looking to plan or improve their facility, maybe some things they want to take a look at more closely, to have basically the most successful, facility that you can have. So that's kind of where we're going to go with this. Next slide. So the Village of Wilmette, if you're not familiar where we're at, we are a North Shore community. We share a southern border with the city of Evanston. We are on the lakefront with Lake Michigan. We are 1 mile north to south and 5 miles east to west. I think about 10,000 households roughly, 28,000 population. Our public works facility is located way on the west end of the community. We're basically right off the Edens Expressway, Lake and Laramie, just south of there. If you know where Loyola Academy is, they're a neighbor of ours up to the north, to give you some perspective, but we're way on the west side. Next slide. So we're going to start with what equipment we have. Next slide. So we have 2 street sweepers. This is our mechanical sweeper. It's an Elgin Pelican. Mechanical meaning it's preliminarily it's all broom, sweeps up debris onto a conveyor and then goes into the hopper in the front. This is when the unit was brand new. It's a 2012, I think put into service in 2013. We typically try to get our sweepers on a rotation of 10 to 11 years or so. They get a lot of high use, and even with that ownership, they are a high maintenance items for us. But that's part of just the nature of street sweeping. With the mechanical sweepers, the benefits are they do a good job with the larger debris that's on the streets, picking that up, which is particularly useful early in the spring. We usually start up our program in middle of March, and coming off the winter, that's where you got a lot of aggregate in the curb line, stuff like that. So it does a good job of that. The downside is it transports pretty slow, and the hopper side is smaller. Next slide. Our second machine, this happens to be a 2017 model. It's Schwarz A9. We've also had Elgin Crosswinds before, which are very good machines as well. So this is a regenerative air unit. We used to always have our regenerative airs on a cab over. We switched with this when we bought this unit to a traditional front chassis, truck chassis, and the operators They've adapted well. So I don't see us going back to the cab over, which is it's more expensive. So regenerative air, so it blows air and collects it, not a true vacuum system, but very good at the fine debris. What's nice about this particular unit is it transports fairly fast. The hopper on it's much bigger than the mechanical, so it can stay out longer. This one we have a whole stainless steel hopper in it, which is kind of nice. Which I think our old Cross when we had a lined unit. But what we like both machines, and we try to capitalize on the strengths of each in our sweeping operations. Next slide. So here's just some background on our sweeping activities. Next slide. So the village has 166 curb lane miles in the village. We actually sweep the town on average 6 to 8 times a year, which for some communities that might sound like a lot. But we have a real dense tree canopy in town. Several years back when we were doing, looking at or upgrading our tree preservation ordinance, they actually did an overhead study of the town, and the canopy coverage is over 40%. We have about 18,000 parkway trees. So there's like a debris load constant throughout the year. So that's why we justify, the number of cleanings. So that's just our routine sweeping of the streets. Next slide. We also, on our east side, we have, our streets are comprised, asphalt mostly, some concrete. And then we also have on our east side, we have brick streets, which are kind of a interesting dynamic, but a little over half our streets on the east side of town are all brick. Some of them are overlaid in asphalt, which the village is trying to, as those roads come up for resurfacing, or transitioning back to brick. Next slide. So it's an example on the east side. Sometimes you'll get some settlement in the curbs of the bricks. And some of these streets are very, very old. So operators just have to be careful of like some of the double curbs and, protecting the equipment and the decks and stuff like that. Next slide. Just another intersection of some of our brick streets on the east side. Next slide. We also have a rotation for our parking lots. So besides all the streets, we do sweep the parking lots. I think we have about 20 or so, and includes facilities. Over 1,100 parking stalls that we maintain. Parking lots get swept maybe, probably 3 to 4 times a year. Next slide. So as our east side, and that's the west side, I think there's just 2 listed on this map. Next slide. Then we also have another tier of service where we do our business district areas. So we have our downtown area, Wilmette Central, we have our Green Bay corridor, we have our Ridge Road corridor, and we have our Linden Square area, which is near our CTA station. So these areas we sweep with more frequency. I want to say upwards of 10 or more times a year. And that includes all of our like parking offsets, stuff like that, all the little knuckles and all that. And this work is scheduled like early hours. We're permissible where we're not, disturbing residents, stuff like that with noise. So that's part of our sweeping program as well. Next slide. This is just a photo of our main downtown area, intersection of Wilmette and Central. It just gives you an idea of what the areas that we take care of. Next slide. This is Linden Square by our CTA station. Next slide. And then of most recent, the last couple of years, we've added some green alleys. These are grant programs with the district. So you have the permeable pavers, forest pavers. So we've got, I think, 5 or 6 right now, and I think we're looking to add a few more. Next slide. So this is what they look like. In general, we have we do sweep all of our alleys like twice a year, usually first thing in the spring, and then later on, late summer, before we transition into leaf collection. Now the green alleys, they get serviced more often because we have to protect the integrity of the porous pavers. So we're at least on a quarterly program on those, if not more. Next slide. So this is just a little bit more of a close-up. There's some larger aggregate in there that we have to be careful of. Next slide. Sometimes we've had issues where if we have demolition or new construction and we have to keep an eye on the alleys because they can get tracked with a lot of debris from different trucks hauling debris out and whatnot. So sometimes they do require a little bit of special handling, you know, again, keep the integrity of the permeable pavers. So in retrospect or in summary, we have our street sweeping, general streets, we have our parking lots, we have our central business district areas, we have our alleys, and in total we generate 700 to 900 cubic yards of debris a year from those operations. Now, excluded from that is when we move into our leaf collection season, which starts mid-October and goes through the first week of December. That's where our sweepers are out constantly following behind our packer trucks and pushers. But in that short 8-week period, we're sweeping the whole town like, I think we have a schedule of like 5 times. Early on, it's pretty light and it's more just jumping from pile to pile and just spot sweeping. But when it gets heavy by Thanksgiving, we're, you know, pretty much sweeping curb to curb. But all that debris goes in with our leaf debris. Next slide. So then that's kind of a summary of all of our operations, what we all do. Again, the total volume that we generate, 700 to 900 cubic yards. Now we're going to kind of move into our facility and what our on-site storage looks like. So next slide. So this is just an overhead. It's a little grainy, but this photo, but starting back in 2005, we did kind of a site assessment, and this kind of leads into our first improvement project that was constructed in 2009. But it looked at basically our material handling for spoils and debris with water, sewer, and also street sweepings. So if you look at this overhead shot on the right, and the way this photo is oriented, the top of the screen's west, bottom is east, and then to the right, right side is north, facing north. But if you look on the north side, you'll see that little spoil lettering there. We had a very, very simple, nothing elaborate bin, makeshift bin, which was just concrete blocks. And I think it was somewhat paved. I'm trying to remember back, but this was 2005 or prior. And that was where all of our water, sewer, spoils would go. And then our sweepings, we had a makeshift, our leaf collection ramp and pit on the west end of the property. We would just use that in the off season to put our sweepings in there. Again, that was just outlined again with large concrete blocks. There was some old asphalt pavement there, but that was pretty much the extent of it. So the first project, the space study for 2009 was, you know, looking to construct a better facility for those two materials. Next slide. So this is kind of what we had prior. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of specific or good photos of the sweeping or the leaf bin there. So a lot of these, what you're going to see are just kind of the spoils and debris, but it's kind of a similar setup to what you see here that we had. It's funny when you go do these presentations, you go back and look in your archives of photos, you think you have stuff, and then it's like, oh, I don't have anything. So, but this is, again, simply this is what we had prior, which is nothing great, as you can see. Next slide. So this is this is prior 2005. This is one of our old vac-ons, and this is them just dumping debris into that area that you saw before that was outlined. Next slide. There's another photo that kind of shows it. Again, best management practices, is everything being followed here? No. So need for improvement. Behind you see our salt dome. Next slide. So again, more of our debris. The next slide. Next slide. Okay, so those pictures kind of showed you what we had. So then we went to the project for 2009, and it was kind of a multifaceted project. So all I'm going to show you is what the improvements were for the material storage. So basically the 2 bins I'm going to show you for our spoils and debris with water, sewer, and then our street sweeping. Another part of that project was we actually had a garage and a wash bay installed, but that was part of the project, but I'm not going to be showing that. And then we also had an admin building constructed, which you'll be able to see that. I have another overhead shot later in the presentation, which I'll show you. So I have kind of like, this is the before, and then I'll show you an after photo. So next slide. So we went from, this is the result of the 2009 construction. So we went from the outlined area with the concrete blocks and it's kind of primitive, and you guys saw that, and then we went to this. So what you see here to the right is the garage and the wash bay facility that was added on. But on the top of the screen, that area, which is 30 by 30 roughly, that is for our street sweepings, and then in the forefront, that is our area for our water sewer spoils. So in the forefront there, you'll see you have that open area, which is 30 by, I think, 45 or 50 roughly. You'll see that there's that small shorter wall. The walls, by the way, on all sides, they're about 7 feet tall, and they all are structural walls. So that's a good thing as we move ahead here to keep that in mind as we talk about the next construction phase. But there, you'll see that short wall in the forefront, and there's one also on, which you'll see later in the sweeping bin area as well. That you have that short wall, there's some small holes drilled in the base of those walls, and then there's a little section, a strip where there's actually a drain, and so where the effluent comes through there, and that actually just tied into our sanitary system. Now, as with a lot of projects, we had, with this one, we had some cost overruns, but if everybody sees this with the best management practice, what's the glaring issue here? And there's no roof, you know, so you have, what the big issue that we experienced is, you know, you have all the rainfall that comes in there and is generating, you know, unwanted moisture to get in there that you have to process. So that was an issue that we had post 2009. We did put in a CIP item to have a roof constructed, but not until our second project that commenced in 2017 did we have an opportunity to actually execute on this. So next slide. So this is 2019 or present day, and compared to that other, the earlier photo that you saw, basically the X's there that I have on there, one of the X's is for the side where our hauling spoils is, and then the other X pointing to the north, that's where the entrance is to our street sweeping bin. So the 2017 project was predominantly, it was a paving improvement project. So what you see is all this nice concrete that was poured throughout our whole yard, and then our leaf ramp was done permanently with a new push wall, all, you know, structural concrete wall, and we also redid our whole fuel island and new tanks underground and all that. And there was an opportunity toward the end of the project because we had some savings. And one of the things that we identified with our facility is like, hey, let's explore installing a roof over our material bins. So that's what we did. Next slide. So what we did is we worked with, Baxter and Woodman was our consulting engineer on it, and then they worked with Brightspan, the local outfitter, I think it was Friedman Buildings, and they basically came to us with a solution that was cost advantageous for us, and we were able to fit it in as part of the project. It was wrapped up, I think, toward the end of, before the winter of 2018, the winter season. But as far as a roof application for our needs, I think it worked out, as you'll see, it worked out very well. It was kind of a one-stop shop for us because they have the engineering capacity on their side. So they do all the structural engineering. You can see with the beams and the framework and whatnot. And then they do the install. So it was kind of a, the full envelope type package, and it worked out great. Next slide. So this is kind of what the final product or the roof looked like over it. So next couple of slides will kind of show that. Next. So you can see that. Now what was kind of unique about this is the way that the walls were orientated and the openings. You can see they kind of had to do some custom design there where they had to, accommodate, our water sewer spoil side and the street sweeping. And like, again, it was a one-stop shop. They designed it, they engineered it structurally sound, and it worked out well. Next slide. So there's just some other photos. And then here in this photo, you can see that little short wall for our spoils bin there. And then that's where at the base, there were some holes that's where it lets the fluid in. And then that section there is what, you need for maintenance, you need to clean that out, at least half a dozen times a year or so, to keep the integrity. One thing that we noticed, and it's not really clear in this picture, but it'll be in for the street sweeping side, is some of the pitch on this or the drainage wasn't great, and stuff would kind of seep out, some of the liquid. So to keep it contained, we did add, there's a curb that is part of the paving project. We added a little bit of a curb there to retain that in the bin, so that would not come out. So that's something that you want to keep in mind when you're designing these, and just what the elevations are and whatnot, and you want to try to keep that in there. One thing that we don't have with this particular bin is just like the clean out of the vac on or whatever equipment is dumping in there. That was not really accommodated. The bin itself is undersized where we couldn't, you can't do both in the same area. So the problem that we have is we have to clean out our equipment outside, and we kind of create a little bit of a mess, and then we have to go back and clean that up. And when you're designing these facilities, you really almost want to have a separate little designated clean out pad with maybe a curb in it where it's tied in together. That would probably be, optimal, which we don't have. Next slide. So this is the street sweeping side. And this one, you can see it more clearly. Off to the left at the base, you can see where we put a curb there in that section, because that section was lower, and we would get, liquid and debris that would come out. So we did ramp that up. Now on the other side, it wasn't as necessary because just because of the elevations. Plus, we also wanted to keep it. We didn't really want a heightened curb there to let the machine drive in and dispose of debris. Now I apologize. This is it's a working facility and a working site, so our cleanliness here and housekeeping isn't exactly perfect. But next slide. So this is our mechanical sweeper. You can see where it is able to pull into the facility and dump. Next slide. So here's another photo of it. Next slide. Now, several slides back, one benefit that we had with this application, this roof application, is those are structural walls. So what made it kind of nice is when they were engineering the roof structure and the anchoring and what have you, that just helped with the integrity of it and whatnot. But if you're looking to build like a permanent type of structure and you want to use this type of fabric style roof application, and if you're starting from scratch, you may want to consider building some structural walls, to give it strength and whatnot. But that ended up being a benefit for us. The cost of the fabric roof structure was cheaper than like your conventional construction type, wood, metal, what have you, shingled roof type structure is significantly less. We've had this, up and running for about 2 years now, and it's been very durable for us. What's the long-term life of this, to be determined, but hopefully we'll have a long, useful life of it is our goal. Next slide. There's just some other photos, and it kind of shows you kind of just the design of the bracing and the structure. Next slide. Now, this area is 30 by 30. It is pretty full. We do have a separate contract with a hauler where all this debris gets hauled out, and the way the contract's set up, they have to take it to a lined landfill. Actually, all of our debris, including our spoils. So this is probably at least, probably about 3 truckloads basically. And so it's street sweeping material, so you don't want to stockpile it. The stuff does decay and have an odor to it, so it does have to be hauled out on regular intervals. And what you see here is just from this past week, and trucks have been scheduled to clean this out and haul it out. So it's something that it's something you have to periodically schedule, and it's just a constant where you have to haul debris out. Is this size, is it adequate for us for sweeping? I would say, yeah, it's pretty good. Could it be a little bit bigger? Yeah, maybe. But I would say on the whole, it's pretty good. As far as takeaways are the kind of similar to the spoil side. It would have been nice if we had with street sweepers, the operators have to clean them out every day. So you need a water source nearby, which we do have. But they have to be clean. At the end of the day, they have to be cleaned thoroughly, just to upkeep the equipment. And it would be nice if there was like a pad that was tied in, where it would, all the material would be, contained together. And we just don't have that. So unfortunately, we have to clean outside of our storage area. And what we have to do is we have to do some supplemental cleaning of the pavement and clean up the debris at day's end, which is not optimal, but it is what we have to do. Now, in the grand scheme, is it still a better system that we had before? Yeah, absolutely. We're much more in compliant, NPDES and whatnot than we were prior. But if that was something that we could have had built in, that would have been great, which unfortunately we do not. Next slide. Next slide. And then it's just some more of the hardware. What you see that down there is just some water line that's running through there. Next slide. So for the street sweeping side, here's that wall again that you have. at the base in the forefront there, you can see a little bit of a remnant of some of the holes that were drilled in to allow the stuff to drain in. Obviously, this area, it doesn't take much for it to get dirtied up, but there is a drain down that drains into our sanitary. But yeah, it's an ongoing maintenance thing. Like, you know, if there's one thing that you want to pay attention to when you're designing these and constructing them is you definitely want to look at what you're draining to and your cleanup. And you want to try to design it where it makes it as easy as possible for you to, you know, keep it clean and maintained. This particular width of this, unfortunately, it's not quite wide enough where we could fit a skid steer in there to clean it. So basically what we're, you know, relegated to is once we get our main bin cleaned out, we'll back in or bring in one of our back-ons, and we just have to clean it out that way. One thing that we did look at for an improvement for this is when we were doing, since we were ripping up all the pavement anyway around it, we were looking at installing like a triple catch basin, and I think that would have been a good solution or a way to go if anybody's looking to construct these. Unfortunately, it wasn't. We just ran into some difficulties in funding that it wasn't going to work out. But if you're starting from scratch, I would highly recommend that you look into incorporating that for just maintenance of the facility. But given that overall, like I said, we're not perfect, but we make the best facility that we have, and we're appreciative, you know, for what we have here. I wouldn't hesitate with the roof solution with the fabric style. That we've been very happy with that, and I think it was a great application for us. Actually, we also built, at the time when we did this, we found some other area at our yard where we built an additional supplemental salt dome, where we just used concrete blocks and we put it, you know, they designed a canopy for us and installed it also as part of the project. And that's been that has worked out very well for us, because as Scott kind of was talking about earlier with your salt, you want at least your salt dome, ideally you want your whole season's worth, if not more, 150% storage capacity. And unfortunately, we have about, even with the supplemental, we have just under half, or about half of ours. So we have that battle during the season of just placing orders and taking deliveries to replenish. So, but whereas if you had that extra capacity, you do it in the off season, you fill it up, and then you don't have to worry about it the rest of the year. So next slide. And that's pretty much it. If you want to reach out to us, like I said, we're a happy bunch. We're pretty good at, we like to think we're pretty good, but we know that there's a lot of others out there that are doing a lot of great things. And we definitely would like to connect with our counterparts. And whether it's myself, Tony, Matt, or Kurt, we'll definitely like to talk with you guys or help you out the best we can, and also learn from you. But thank you for your time.
Okay, Guy, thank you very much. Great job. We do have a couple questions coming in. Let's see. First question is, do you hold any street fairs or festivals in Wilmette? If so, do you perform additional sweeping after those events?
Well, with COVID, a lot of those events aren't happening, but what's popular in our town is block parties, where residents like to do, or they close off, we'll drop off barricades where on like a weekend, they'll close off their block and have just kind of a block party. And what we try to do is we'll sweep those streets ahead of time. And, you know, we'll also inspect the street if there's any immediate pothole issues and stuff like that, just to make sure it's safe for everybody. But we do sweep ahead of those. Also, we do have like a summer fest in our downtown area. You know, our downtown areas, they're on a heightened sweeping schedule anyways, but that would be, you know, cleaned very thoroughly ahead of that event as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Here's another. It says, regarding those fabric roofs, how long do those fabric roofs last?
You know, I don't know. I would have to check in with the manufacturer, but it's probably more of the fabric itself from like the UV, I would think, degradation that would probably, I mean, you look at the supports, it looks like it's all galvanized steel and everything. So like that would probably have a longer life than maybe the fabric itself. But I would think that we're trying to get at least 15 years out of it. But I'm not sure offhand what the manufacturer, you know, if they have a warranty or recommends on that.
Okay. Here's another. Have you done any chemical analysis of the street sweepings or the spoil?
No, we have not. I know several years back, there was that requirement where like excavation, like one of the things that was permissible is whatever you excavate out of a hole, you can put it back without testing it. But otherwise, everything else has to be tested, you know, to determine if it's clean or what have you. But you know, the test per load, it was pretty expensive, and just the volume that we generate. What we decided to do is with our hauling company and disposal, we just made it a requirement that they had to take everything to a lined landfill facility. And yeah, that there's a higher cost per load to do that, but just a little bit of cost benefit analysis, we determined that was the right thing to do. And that's what we've done to get around, you know, testing of individual loads and stuff like that.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Guy. I think that's all the questions we have for you at this time. I did see one come in for Scott. And I believe, yeah, Scott's still with us. So, Scott, people wanted to know if you could estimate how much of your annual salt purchase is wasted.
Wasted? No, I couldn't estimate, but I'm going to say it's very, very minimal. Anything that we spill in the yard, we do sweep up and it goes right back in the bin. Anything that would happen to be spilled on the roadway, we would send a machine out, we would shovel the material into the machine, and it would go back in the bin. So I would say it's very, very minimal.
Okay, great. I'm not seeing any other questions right now for any of the presenters, but you know, do any of the presenters have anything else that they'd like to add before we wrap things up?
No, I think we're all good.
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, I think that's all we have. So I'd like to thank our presenters one more time. So thank you, Dan and Jack, Scott and Guy, for sharing your knowledge and experiences with us. I'd also like to thank our audience for being with us this afternoon. We hope you enjoyed and learned a few things from the webinar. Please remember that Mary Mitros will email everyone a link with a recording of the webinar, all 3 presentations, and a certificate for 1.5 PHs. Please also keep in mind that we have another webinar scheduled for next Wednesday, June 17th from 12 to 1:30, and that will cover field program pollution prevention for MS4 communities. So until next time, be healthy, be safe, and thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.